Good evening. Welcome to the first edition of Khalistan Extremism Monitor's Punjab Security Matters series. Today we will be focusing on keeping the peace. We have a very eminent panel here today, people who have distinguished themselves each in their own field. We have Lieutenant General HS, I'm so sorry, but HS Panag. He has had a very distinguished career of over 40 years in the army. He served in the 1971 India-Pakistan War, as well as several tenures in theaters of insurgency across India. He was the General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of two armies, the Northern Command and Central Command. He's also distinguished himself after retirement with very frank commentaries and statements on issues of defense and security, and has established himself as an analyst in these fields. Professor M. Rajivlochan is a professor at Panjab University. His primary areas of interest are contemporary India, and he has worked especially on the creation of communities, as well as how communities come together to achieve common goals. Mr. Rajinder Singh is an officer of the 1982 batch of the Indian Police Service. He joined the service at a time when the insurgency in Punjab was at its initial rise, and he served right through the peak of the insurgency to its end in 1995, and continued to serve through in Punjab. He is regarded as one of the most distinguished officers there, one of the people who played a decisive role in the counterinsurgency in the state. Today we'll be talking about keeping the peace. Now, the peace in Punjab was very, very hard won. More than 21,500 people were killed in the terrorist movement in Punjab between 1980 and 1995, at a time when 1995 is when the movement is thought to have more or less been comprehensively defeated under the leadership of KPS Gill. Nevertheless, KPS Gill did remark at that juncture that the defeated rump of Khalistani terrorism was fled to Pakistan, was hiding there, and has continued to play mischief not only from Pakistan, but also from various countries abroad, where they have managed to secure a safe haven. Nevertheless, very little in terms of terrorist activity has been noticeable in the post-1995 phase for almost, you could say, a decade or more than a decade. If we look occasional, every 2 to 3 years, there would be a significant, even a major incident, but nothing in terms of a sustained movement. What we see, however, if we look at the data since 2000, is that you had periodic incidents, of course, from 2000 to 2000. In 2000, you had about 10 fatalities. In 2002, 4. Then you have a gap of 5 years. Then you have another few incidents, one incident, 7 fatalities. Between 2007 and 16, for 8 years, we have no incident, no fatalities related to Khalistani terrorism in Punjab. Then post-2016, every year has marked at least one fatality. And 2016 had 3 civilians killed, 17, 6 civilians killed, 18, 3 civilians killed, 19, 1 terrorist killed. That doesn't show up in your graphic there. 2020, 2 civilians killed, and 21, 1 terrorist killed. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Rajinder Singh, because this is something that you've seen and watched very closely from the ground. What does this data tell us? And does it reflect a situation where you could see a resurgence of terrorism, or are these merely occasional incidents by the surviving and elements who can only create passing mischief in the state?
Thank you, Mr. Ajai Sahni. In fact, these are all sporadic events and incidents that sometimes the remnants try to sort of show up. In general, the scenario in the state is not that alarming, that people are in any manner scared or there is some sort of terror in their minds. There are incidents of drones coming, explosives recovered, grenades recovered, some arms recovered, some people arrested also. And these days, what we find is that they are more to sort of remaining digitally connected and sort of trying to throw pro-terrorist propaganda so that they can subvert the minds of the people, like that SFJ, Sikh for Justice. He keeps sending messages through phones, and on every occasion he tries to own, as he's the master of all events. Maybe even he has been caused for it or not, but he tries to own it up. Like if something happens, if something happened with regard to PM security, well, even there he was trying to seek credit. So such things are happening, which we find are usual because of the remnants, because of the defeated elements which you mentioned, are doing something like that. And good watch is being maintained.
Right. General Panag, this is a border state. We also find repeatedly, at least from the center, somewhat alarming assessments about what is happening in Punjab. How would you evaluate the security situation there? And do you think there is a significant threat of resurgence? Are there activities now that do constitute and potentially constitute a grave danger, especially if we are at some stage engaged in a war with Pakistan?
I think as far as alarming reports are concerned, there are two aspects. One is that it makes news and every small thing gets reported, and arms smuggling that may be totally restricted to the general, smuggling activities along the border also gets highlighted as, arms for Khalistan. Also, if you notice, just follow your own portal, your own, this thing says that from somewhere around 10th of January, all kinds of reports that 350 people are likely to infiltrate and K2 Khalistanis and Kashmiris have joined up and they're about to happen. They're going to do something and reports. So this is a typical action of our intelligence agencies, which remains on throughout. Whenever there's a occasion or whenever there's a visit closer to elections, common sense, it's a forewarning, of course, but at the same time, highly exaggerated. Now, coming to the terrorism as such, whether it's making a resurgence or not, there's no visible pattern of resurgence. And I entirely agree with what former DG Police Rajinder Singh said, that these are the rump trying to make their presence felt. But having said that, see, it is Pakistan's goal that apart from Kashmir, they must start something, here in Punjab. And so they will try everything. And all the international associations linked to Khalistan or Khalistani movement are in some way connected to the ISI. And even the rump organizations of the erstwhile active militant organizations, which were in Punjab in 80 to 95, some of their leaders are in Pakistan, Jasbir Singh Rode and the others, they are still connected with them. But there is no mesmeric leader within Punjab who is visible or who is the visible face. And the erstwhile Damdami Taksal, which was at the forefront of everything, is in cohorts with the Bharatiya Janata Party today. And in the pre-elections, the spokesperson of Damdami Taksal has joined the Bharatiya Janata Party. It didn't catch too much of attention. There is no visible organization available. Of course, the remnants of Dal Khalsa, International Sikh Students Organization, All India Sikh Students Organization, they are all there. But in the sense that as they were active before, there is no all-encompassing organization. Like at that time, Dal Khalsa was the political face of Janal Singh Bhindrawale. But on the net, in the cyberspace, there's immense propaganda. by the Six for Justice and other organizations in Germany, in England, and all. So that means
I'd like to come back to that issue of
cyber
and
so they are visible. They are visible all over, and our own press highlights it and extends this thing, gives them prominence. One last point on this issue is that you see. What's happening in Punjab is being very carefully, what's happening in the rest of the country is being very carefully observed by the people of Punjab. And up to the Kisan movement started, there was no issue, no problem, and odd sporadic remarks against somebody, you are a Khalistani and all those. But the moment the movement picked up, and especially the unfortunate happenings on Republic Day in last year, when what happened at the Red Fort and by the section of this thing. Now, while the movement as such may be aloof from them, that there was certain intermingling of some hardcore elements amongst them. After all, Sidana and all these Sidhu people couldn't have gone to the Red Fort and done all that. After all, they were at some stage they were around there. And now Sidana is. Recently, I read that he's one of the candidates of one of the Kisan these political outfits. So then the labeling and the media propaganda, which was launched and which recently, when there was this thing lapse in the Prime Minister's security, again the same thing was brought up. So this is something that the people of Punjab are very closely observing, and it's likely to affect their psyche should other elements which are required for resurgence come up.
Professor Rajivlochan, what we saw, prior to 2007, the occasional incidents that kept occurring between 1995-2007, most of, by incidents, I mean terrorist incidents, most of the individuals who were identified as being involved tended to be mercenaries. They were not people who were ideologically motivated. They were not people who were really convinced about the cause of Khalistan. Some of them were actually not even Sikhs. There were Hindus who were involved in these incidents. Post-2016, there are suggestions that there are people who are more and more ideologically committed. You have individuals who have been radicalized. Some of them have been radicalized in jail. Do you see this again as only an occasional incidental development, or do you see a cultural transformation, something that is happening to a significant mass of the people in Punjab?
See, we have to understand that societies are extraordinarily fragile entities. Societies need nurturing all the time by everyone who is participating in it. And at the same time, societies are also very robust, which means that if people want to intentionally break up a society, they would have great difficulty in doing that. However, we also need to notice that in our kind of society, which is on one side, it is an extremely innocent kind of society where people tend to make extreme statements all the time. General Panag mentioned that whole statement about Khalistanis being involved in the farmers' movement, Khalistanis being involved in the Prime Minister's security breach thing. That kind of thing happens in our society far more than it happens elsewhere. And social media, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, they have a tendency to magnify these statements quite a lot, which in turn means that a person who's saying negative things, which is what a larger number of people in India on both sides prefer to do, then we are in very serious trouble. The thing to notice is this, this whole area of communicating what India is, what India should be, how India should organize itself, how these diversities of people with their diverse understandings, how they can come together. And remember, we are not asking for people to respect each other. All that we are asking is, please do not humiliate each other. So long as you do not humiliate each other, it really doesn't matter whether you like each other, respect each other, etc., etc. But this notion that casual humiliations are unwelcome, this has to be somehow drilled into our people. You mentioned this thing about the self-radicalized, ideologically driven people who are emerging today. You know, there used to be these self-radicalized people earlier also. I remember the son of the vice chancellor who went and participated in a very radical action. And then when he came out of his troubles, jail, etc., and he was asked, so why did you do it? His core answer was, I really don't know why I did it. I just did it that day. So we need to ensure that even these people who are getting self-radicalized, they don't get so much negative information in their minds. It doesn't penetrate their minds and make them completely hostile to the idea of India. Also remember that Pakistan and China are not going to lose a single moment if they can afford to somehow bring India down or somehow create trouble for all of us. So there is a security angle to it. There is a small component of communication strategies that we need to figure out. There is also this thing that we need to keep on assuring each other all the time that we are not going to humiliate each other. Because the police is doing its job well, the intelligence agencies are doing their job well, but the university system, the society at large, unfortunately has been found wanting again and again. Remember, the Kejriwal movement came up within a span of just a few months. In a similar fashion, the Janata Party emerged in just a few months to overthrow the Congress and try to overthrow the entire system of those days. So dramatic changes are possible in our society. Very rapidly they happen. We have seen earlier things collapsing. What we need to figure out is how to control communication, how to control ideas, how to ensure that these people who get self-radicalized, okay, aadmi ke dimag pe you don't have any control, that these people who get self-radicalized, they continue to remain in a minority and they continue to feel that their thoughts and their actions, their desire for action is meaningless and irrelevant in India. Now, how to do that? That is something for which we will have to sit down and apply our minds. Till now, our strategy analysts have not given any thought to this particular aspect of our problem of extremism in India.
I'd like to just carry on with you, Professor, for one moment. You speak of self-radicalization, but we don't see, we also see rather an extreme, not terrorism, but a very strong trend to radicalization across society, particularly through religious institutions. We just saw a few days ago a known terrorist who was killed in Pakistan. He was a terrorist and a drug smuggler who was given a Antim Ardas. His parents were honored. Harmeet Singh PhD is who I'm speaking of. We also see extremely questionable statements emerging from religious leaders. We are talking about Punjab and Khalistan. Consequently, I will have to say over here, Sikh religious leaders. Other communities are equally, leaderships in other communities are equally guilty. And within this context, we have this whole drumming up of this idea of be'adbi, sacrilege. Now, I'd like to know from you as a historian, does this idea of sacrilege have any roots in the history of Sikhism, particularly the mandate of a death penalty for an act of sacrilege? We have Navjot Singh Sidhu, the chief of the Congress party, saying the people who commit sacrilege should be hanged in public. Now, first, the question as a historian, do you see that such an idea has any kind of historical roots among the Sikh people?
See, it doesn't have any historical roots in India. Indians simply are not designed to sacrifice themselves in this fashion or to kill other people in this fashion. So it has to be drilled into them. People have to think about it constantly and say, ki ye hum karna chahiye. And we do have a model for sacrilege and what sacrilegious behavior, how sacrilegious behavior should be dealt with. We have it from Pakistan, and that is completely religion-driven kind of a thing. And people start going half mad, and they use religion as an excuse to perpetuate all sorts of bad behavior in that society. हमें जो करने की जरूरत है, what we need to do is we need to openly and completely criticize such behavior. We need to condemn it. We need to say repeatedly that sacrilegious behavior is not acceptable, but you cannot resort to this kind of vigilant injustice for sacrilege either. Remember, if religion can be used by bad people to do bad things, surely religion can also be used by good people to do good things. One of the places where religion gets used all the time is the security forces, the police, the army. They completely deal with religion all the time, and then they make this big image ki we are all one. So remember, there's a possibility for everyone to be one within religion. There's a possibility for everyone to ensure that they don't humiliate each other. And these present cases of sacrilege in Punjab, these are just made up cases. Like anyone who has any notion about how these things are played out would tell you that these are completely made out cases in which there's a bunch of people who are trying to bully someone else, and there's one bunch of people who knows if I press this button, this is how the community will respond. So that drama goes on. The one element which can stop this from happening, the police forces, they, in earlier occasions when this would happen in the case of Hindu-Muslim sacrilege cases, remember in the 1960s, we have had pitched battles in the cities of India between Hindus and Muslims. And the usual thing would be that Muslims would say कि हमारे यहाँ सुअर मिल गया, and the Hindus would say कि हमारे यहाँ मरी हुई गाय मिल गई. And then there would be a tremendous conflict and cities would be shut down for weeks together. There was one instance in which some cities were shut down for almost 3 months. All civil life ended over there because of such conflicts. What we need to do is we need to confront such conflicts directly. And we need to stop pussyfooting around this. There are bad people amongst us who use religion for bad purposes. We should be openly critical about them. We should openly condemn them. And we should create an environment where it becomes possible for the good people to step in. Abhi jaisa ho raha hai, where the good people end up saying, oh, you know, this person has an excuse for doing what he has done. No, there's no excuse for humiliating each other. There is absolutely no excuse for misbehaving with each other. And that should be said again and again by everyone. We should not be expecting that Modi will say this or Amit Shah would say this. We should be saying this ourselves also. We should be saying this to everyone who is willing to listen to us. And those who are not willing to listen to us, we should ensure that they do not speak too much.
General Panag, across the board, when these recent incidents occurred, even when we had the Bargari incident of 2015, what we find is that politicians, by and large, have been trying to, politicians and even religious leaders, go along with the more extremist sentiment over here. If people are being killed, for instance, in the three incidents that occurred recently, during the farmers' agitation, and the two more recent incidents where two people were lynched. I know of, other than Amarinder Singh, no political leader spoke out explicitly against the violence, against the lynchings. Most of them tried to justify some kind of extreme retaliation against anyone guilty of an act of sacrilege. As a practicing Sikh, what do you think this kind of validation of such violence says? Not only, I mean, I'd like to just underline over here, over the last couple of years, the Sikhs have earned themselves a kind of stature and a reputation globally by the kind of services they've done. No other community has come out and spoken or acted with the generosity and the commitment and the dedication that the Sikh community has. And then you have incidents like this. How, as a Sikh, do you respond to this?
Yeah, I must begin with the disclaimer that despite my Sikh identity, I must mention that I'm actually an atheist. And I have been on and off in younger age, but I kept the turban on because I think I look smarter wearing a turban. Okay, I'll leave it at that. But having said that, I'm well versed with the Sikh religion and well versed with its history. And I've got a very clear view on this. Firstly, whatever the professor has said, I entirely agree with him on this issue. Now, there is no tradition historical, no religious diktat or anything like that in Sikh religion that you can kill people like this. That also within the premises of a Gurdwara.
The Golden Temple.
Absolutely not done. I think the people who are silent and our political class and even amongst my fellow Sikhs are as guilty as the ones who are committing the crime. And it's a very bad thing to do within the Gurdwara if somebody is lynched to death. It's a societal problem also in India. While it's not a trend, as I mean, we're not a religious nation as such as a lot of other countries are. But in India, people have been reacting very violently to any movement towards any kind of religion, any religion. I'm telling you. And whereas in here it is why it is little different, and why it is cause of concern is because it is linked to terrorism. There is a distinct link between these Beadmi incidents and terrorism. Some may be just political, some may be, by, as people say, by mentally deranged people and all. But please go back to 78. The start point of militancy in Punjab was the 13th of April 1978 incident, when the Nirankaris were holding their Sammelan in Amritsar, and Akhand Kirtani Jatha led by Fauja Singh, who died along with 13 others, and even Bhindrawale was there. That started it all. And we must not forget that. This incident and the Nakodar Beadmi incident of 1986, that incident did act as a kind of a catalyst for the militancy and terrorism in Punjab. And also, if during this period, 82, 83, even later, the Dal Khalsa was involved in a big way in doing the reverse at the temples. And they, in Patiala and other places, they had thrown the cow tails, and at one place even the cow head, in a very systematic manner to divide the communities. So this then even number of other incidents were linked to terrorism. Now it is very difficult to pinpoint as to what is happening at the moment, because these could be political. But for even a political party to find a kind of a kamikaze person who may not even be from Punjab and then do this is extremely difficult. It involves a high degree of motivation or whatever, psychologically convincing a person, money probably. And so I will not rule out that this has been done by the extremists who are there in Pakistan and by the ISI. I will not rule it out. On the face of it, these incidents were minor, and because once there is a general feeling of discontentment, of persecution, and etc., every minority feels that way, then these incidents do affect the psyche of the public at large.
Rajinder Singh ji, we've had 3 killings. Now, after the first killing, one could have asked, I mean, the Bargari incident, there was a police shooting thereafter, people died, but the perpetrator was not identified or killed or lynched. But after the first killing, as General Panag points out, it would be very difficult to find more volunteers. Monetary attraction could be there. Some people may be pushing this. This seems to be very clearly orchestrated incident. Somebody is behind this. Number 2, do these individuals go into this from a sentiment of, an extremist position that I am going to go and do this act of sacrilege, I am going to go and destroy the holy book? Or is it that they take it for granted that they will in fact not face the extreme consequence? What is the actual mindset, the motivation, and the calculus of the individuals who are going into this, to the extent that these have been identified or documented?
Adding to what General Panag was saying, There are two more aspects very crucial. One is that what are the reasons behind why these people do it? There can be multiple reasons, not only one. There's somebody can be of unsound mind. There may be somebody is frustrated with his own life. Somebody wants to figure out in news. Somebody just wants some mischief spontaneously. So these things we have been encountering. People do things just for the sake of doing it and then seeing a tamasha. So it is not merely that it will be just desecration of the place or it is a terrorist activity. It can be, it may not be. Secondly, another crucial aspect is that in society, we are highly sensitive to these things. This sensitivity has to be balanced by our mentors. That this sensitivity leads us to various odd things like lynching, like claiming that it should be dealt with the heaviest punishment. Perhaps we should be little working in this direction, that if something has happened, we should be scientifically viewing it and we should present facts in such a manner that society is convinced to respond in a manner so that we do not meet more serious situation. As Mr. Panag was mentioning, that certain incidents became catalyst for germinating of terrorism. So that is, these two areas are very important. Of course, if we do not kill somebody, if somebody is not lynched, we can get a lot of information from him. We will be able to appreciate why he has landed up in such a situation. That is very important, and we need to educate people that they should not take law in their own hands. It is very important. All responsible leaders of the society, they should spread a message that, look, these things we have to deal with in a manner so that our harmony is not disturbed.
Mr. Rajinder Singh speaks of responsible leaders in our society. That is a very, very difficult concept in the current situation. Professor Rajivlochan, we've talked about multiple motives. We've talked about the motivation of individuals who do this kind of thing. But is it not something of a coincidence that these things seem to happen usually in a period? Even in 2015, we saw the Burglary incident was not very far away from an election. And these particular incidents are even closer.
You see, we can't presume that the politicians profit out of this. Let's not presume that the politicians are doing it or the politicians are profiting out of any of such hanky-panky, because it's much easier for the Pakistanis to step in and simply urge a few people to behave in the way they do. As Rajinder Singh ji pointed out, there could be a madman, there could be a man with very little understanding of what he's doing. And it's like pushing a button. And those people who want us, people in India, to dance in a particular fashion, they know that so long as they push those right buttons, we will do precisely what we are doing. Now, that is the point at which we need to tell our people, look here, if someone comes and says bad things to you, the response should not be that you turn violent and you start claiming कि हमारी इज्जत मिट्टी में मिल गई, and we will respond with the maximum possible force to that. That is not the right response. The right response would be to educate our people that, okay, allow our police system to step in and resolve the issue and find out who is responsible for doing what. In the present instance, for example, if you notice, as soon as the chief minister said that the police will take due action, immediately all the jhagda stopped. There was a small episode in Patiala a few days ago, and that Patiala episode did not result in any kind of violence anyway, simply because people know now they have been somehow, it has been put into their head that they should not respond violently like this. Remember, Indian society is one of the most violent societies in the world. It's one of the most violent societies in the world because you don't have any controls over violence. And therefore, uncontrolled violence happens frequently. And this uncontrolled violence needs to be somehow controlled. And that's why Gandhiji used to go around saying, we are a non-violent people, we are a non-violent people. And Mr. Gandhi was able to persuade us to believe that we actually are non-violent. Of all the societies in the world, across history, India is the only society which was a completely weaponized society. All through its history, no controls over anyone and everyone carrying weapons. It was the British who came in, and in the 1860s, they said, no, you cannot carry weapons without a license. Now, I don't know about you people, but the region where I come from, the British law, which said you can't carry weapons, really did not matter. We had weapons with us, completely illegal weapons, even when we went in primary schools. So remember, this is a society which has to be taught. It has to be educated in how to behave well. You've just seen a major educational program which was launched about 2 years ago. Don't cough in your hands. I remember when we were in school, we were used to be taught, don't cough on the person in front of you, cough in your hand. Now they said cough on your elbow, cough on a mask, and people learned it. So we are also a very amenable people. But if we are an amenable people, if we are a people who are eager to learn something new and something better, then we need people. It's not political leaders. It can be social leaders. It can be just normal you and me. It can be people who are on the social media. We need to teach each other all the time, continuously, on how to behave well. If you remember, there was this episode of this young boy in Britain who wanted to kill the Queen. Now, when this young boy wanted to kill the Queen, his father's response was, no, this is a boy who has been misled. I completely condemn it. Now, that is a statement. I completely condemn it. Simply doesn't happen in India. In India, the parents step and say, nahi, mera bacha, he's such a nice person. I don't believe he can have done that. I'm sure that this is something which has been orchestrated by the police. Someone has misled him. We start giving these excuses. What we need to do is, as a society, we need to change our mindset and start understanding that good behavior has to be appreciated and bad behavior has to be roundly condemned, irrespective of who is doing the bad behavior. That whole thing about the Shaheen Bagh thing, where they shut down an entire street, saying we have been hurt and we would like to say that we also exist. Now, that is seriously bad behavior. People need to be told, you cannot behave like this.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to take the, get through our open discussion a little quicker than I had initially thought of. I'd like to just first of all talk about who do you think, General Panag, you had already, I interrupted you earlier. Who do you think are the principal radicalizers? What are the principal channels of radicalization in Punjab today? Khalistani radicalization is what we're speaking of.
I think one is basically today everybody is on WhatsApp, and today everybody watches YouTube and all the various kind of audio visual channels that are available today. I think the main vehicle being used for spreading the word and message and everything is the cyberspace. In fact, there's an article written by a journalist, and it's worth a read recently. And it's a very interesting title he has given to it. It's written in the Quillet, that is a Canadian magazine. He says, next year in Simla, 30 years after defeat, the Khalistani movement fights in cyberspace. And he analyzes it in detail as to how they are very active in the cyberspace, how they something in an organized manner, they launch a hate campaign against the person who gets after them. They send out threats. He also says that most of these people they're not very active. And he also says that in the referendum started by Sikhs for Justice, only 1% people from Punjab have responded. No, one doesn't know how he has come to this conclusion. And he says in UK, only 10% of the Sikhs responded to the referendum for Khalistan. So he has analyzed this in great detail, and I think it's the cyberspace which is being used, and that, as we know from the experience of the Islamic fundamentalists, that it's a very effective medium, and it was not available to the people before. Imagine a situation back in the 80s if we had all this, and a mesmeric person like Janal Singh, Sant Janal Singh Bhadrawale, talking to the masses, the kind of way he would have done this. So this is something which we have to watch, not so much to condemn it all the time and everything, but keep track of it and carry out an analysis, and where necessary also take action. And especially with the portals which are amenable and where our own laws are being passed, how to stop all this. And this is in the United States, they get maximum information about terrorism from
the net, yes.
From the net. And this is something which we are lacking in India.
Right. Rajinder Singh ji, certainly we are all, I'm coming to you, sir. Certainly cyberspace is a problem. It is a problem across the world for radicalization. But we also hear, for instance, of specific individuals who are engaged in committing particular crimes. The man who died in a suicide attack, attempted suicide attack in December, he was an ex-policeman, is supposed to have been radicalized in jail. On the ground, who are the agents of radicalization? And to what extent do we have these radicalization processes ongoing?
When you were asking about principal radicalization, those who do radicalizers, I was reminded of the principles, rather the basis on which radicalization taking place. The radicalization is taking place on various things like maladministration also. There are grievances of the people, they are not properly dealt with. There is a lot of unemployment. People are idle. They want some mischief. And there's a lot of social trends happening in business and economic trends. People are confused about it.
Right.
And there is lot many things are happening which are frustrating and which is just generating sense of alienation amongst people. Those things need to be controlled. That they also contribute to this kind of radicalization.
If I may just now move on to a last small segment in which I'd like each of you to tell us that, knowing these trends, seeing where this is going, what are the most, in each of your opinions, I'll start with you, Professor Rajivlochan, what in your opinion is most needed in order to preserve the peace in Punjab? How do we ensure that we do not return to even higher levels, not just high levels of violence?
See, I'll connect this with what Mr. Rajinder Singh was saying just now. First, we should ensure that we have a society where people don't imagine themselves to be shortchanged. As of today, there's far too many people who are imagining themselves to somehow having been deprived of something, somehow having lost something, and somehow having been cheated by the rest of the society. That's a very important thing. Now, this is a feeling. This is not something which actually happens on the ground. Because in any society, there will be economic issues, there will be social issues, people will have problems, and the state or the society can only do this much to help people out of their problems. If you remember, in the 1980s and the 1990s, when Khalistan was growing in Punjab, agriculture in Punjab was flourishing. Actually, it was more flourishing than it was in Bihar, UP, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh. And yet, and this is H.S. Shergill has done a whole detailed article on how much more profitable agriculture was in Punjab in the 1980s and the 1990s than it had been in the 1960s and the 1950s. However, this was also the time when people talked about how there were economic problems in Punjab, how Punjabis were more aspirational and therefore they were taking to this terrorism. The thing is this, we need to tell people that they should not be part of they should not seek solutions which are false solutions. Thinking about extremism of any kind is actually a seriously bad solution. There have been political science studies who have examined political movements, and they've said, on the basis of data from across the world, they've told us that movements which are extremists have just a 5% chance of success. Something which the Indian security forces tell us again and again. If you take to extremism, your total life is going to be 15 days, 30 days, 40 days. It keeps on changing from situation to situation, but they say your elimination is inevitable.
Yes.
A movement which is a militant movement has a slightly more chance of success, but a movement which is a peaceful movement. We just saw a major peaceful movement coming out from Punjab, the farmers' agitation. It was almost impossible to contain it. It was almost impossible to find people who would say, these farmers are doing a bad job of whatever they're doing. And the simple fact that they were able to manage this as a non-violent movement meant that the government had to back off. The thing
I'm going to have to interrupt you, sir.
This is a message which needs to be communicated to anyone and everyone, because there will always be causes for which you can oppose something. In America, they are opposing vaccination. It's a major popular movement.
I'll have to interrupt you, sir. Rajinder Singh ji, what do you think are the 2 or 3 most important things we need to do to ensure that peace in Punjab is not lost?
Immediately coming to my mind, 2 things are that one is that we have to make our police very effective and professional. In last 15 years, the MLAs and the Halka in charges have played a very dirty role in Punjab. Police has been subjected to their control. Police has been obeying their commands. And there was a lot of mispolicing, I must say that. We have to improve it. Then secondly, when we talk of good governance, we have to have a very serious relook on the entire administration, how we are running the administration. Because these things are germinating problems, and they give cause to the unemployed youth and others to sort of succeed in making mischiefs.
Thank you. General Panag, your most important suggestions?
I think my most important suggestion is that as a society, as a nation, we must be extremely sensitive to not to hurt the religious sentiments of each other in any manner. Any kind of labeling based on religion is, I think, is a disaster. It's waiting, going to cause a disaster. Nothing affects the psyche of a sensitive state like Punjab, of the Sikh community, than being labeled in the rest of the country as Khalistanis. When the Khalistanis themselves are, as I said, only the runt and is making a cyber presence felt. Now, this is something which I consider very important. And number 2 is that I would like that, if not the political class, the Sikh intelligentsia, the Sikh community at large, within itself must condemn these kind of actions like lynching of people in the gurdwaras, and also come forward to educate the youth more and exert more influence over it.
Thank you. And now we've got a whole lot of questions. I'm going to be very selective. I'm going to take out only a handful, which we may be able to treat in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I've got a very interesting observation and question from Stephen Gorzula. He says his area of specialization is water resources. And he points out that a foreseeable problem is that Punjab aquifer will be depleted in less than a decade. Agriculture will collapse and displace up to 30 million people in both India and Pakistan. Will this be yet another stimulus for radicalization and extremism? Would you like to address the question, General?
Yes, since I live on the farm here in Sarand Fatehgarh Sahib, our water levels from my childhood, they were very low. Once the canals came up, they almost were at 15, 20 feet. Today, we have to go down to 80 to 100 feet, 5 times drop. I would say from about 1959, 60 to now. And this wheat and rice cycle is definitely is the root cause of all this. And before the canals came, I'm sure you all know that this whole area, right up to the especially the Malwa belt, was there used to be sand dunes around here. So there's a very strong possibility, and that will definitely be cause of distress. So, but if we want to do anything about it, then the agriculture sector requires a massive investment, and also the industrialization of Punjab and better governance of Punjab. That may save us from this. Firstly, you have to compensate the people or give higher prices for the alternate crops that they will cultivate. Something has to be done, and heavy investment in dairy farming and what have you to deal with agriculture as an alternate means rather than the wheat and rice cycle.
Rajinder Singh ji, I have Manpreet Kaur asking, why are only a few NRI Sikhs talking about the Khalistan referendum and not Indian Sikhs?
Yeah, it's very interesting because those who live here, they know better. Number one, they've seen things. Every family was affected by terrorism. Someone was killed in police, someone was killed in the innocent people, someone was terrorist. I don't think there's any family left or any relative left who is not pinched because of the terrorism. So that is how they are having a very direct feel, and they wish that it should not happen again. And also those who are sitting abroad, they also know them that they have various other agendas. There's a lot of conflict in NRIs about control over gurdwaras in foreign countries. Then they try to sort of have their identity in Punjab by various other methods. Because after earning a little bit, they seek to have their identity also in Punjab. Many of them are interested to participate in elections, have some sort of participation in political game. So they do indulge in all these things without realizing that perhaps it has very bad effect on the law and order in the state.
But Ajay, there is one point linked to this, and a very important one, and that is that today in Punjab, especially out of the landed communities and even others, there's one member of the family is abroad. Now this is I would say that he is now in turn influenced by the I won't say that by Khalistanis, but I would say he gets inclined towards a very different view of religion because he starts doing well in affluence, and the family here is surviving on his remunerations and his dole that he sends. So this link is something that has also one has to worry about it in future.
I have a couple of questions from Anurag Sharma of the Vivekananda International Foundation. I'll address only one of them to you, Professor Rajivlochan. He says, how do we see extradition treaties with the US, UK, and Canada and their action over extradition of enlisted pro-Khalistan terrorists? In fact, I think it's not just the extradition treaties. How do you see this overall? What is the attitude of these governments abroad to these Khalistanis, and the degree to which it seems that they obstruct or block on various grounds the extradition of individuals?
See, like I said earlier, in any democracy, people have a freedom to have whatever view they want to have. It really doesn't matter what your view is, whether you want to break up India, whether you want to make India a stronger nation, whether you want to make Khalistan in Pakistan, whether you want to make a Khalistan in India. These are perfectly valid views for various people to have. Any decent democracy would say that there's absolute and total freedom for anyone to have these views. The operational thing is not whether these people have views or whether they should be stopped by a government. The operational thing is that the rest of the society needs to be created in such a manner. The rest of the society needs to be briefed, if I may use that word, briefed in such a manner that the rest of the society doesn't respond to them. They become
Professor, I want to know, this is
irrelevant.
more particular.
Remember,
if I may interrupt you, sir. If I may interrupt you momentarily.
The Khalistanis became very important in the run-up to the previous elections, 2017 wale elections ke pehle. They did a lot of things. And the rest of the society did not respond to them. Because the rest of the society did not respond to them, therefore, they became irrelevant. What General Panag said, ki these people, they are getting self-radicalized abroad, and then they learn from them and they have their views. Now, how can any free society stop anyone from having whatever view they have? What you can do is, as a free society, make their views irrelevant. And that is the point at which India should be functioning.
May I go to you, Rajinder Singh ji? I think one point that has not been addressed in precisely this aspect of this question is there are a lot of people who have cases of terrorism, including murder, against them, who are in these countries abroad and who are being protected by the law under various grounds. Demands for evidence that are completely irrational, unacceptable, unfulfillable, or even pleas that the Indian jail system and justice system is so unreliable that they could not possibly get justice, therefore they should not be extradited. What is your perception of the actions of these governments in such cases? I'm not talking about radicalized individuals. I'm not talking about SFJ saying, I want to divide India. I'm talking about individuals who have hard cases of terrorism against them.
The most important is that it is very cumbersome process to pursue extradition of those fellows. Secondly, administrative convenience also here. Those who really hold the power, they perhaps select who has to be brought on, who has not to be brought here. Because sometimes it is not convenient to bring someone. Because if he's brought even in Indian jail, he will have better convenience to sort of disseminate his view to locals here. So I think every case has its own merit. We have to see, we cannot really say something for all the cases. All cases are different. In jails also, we are not succeeding to maintain real semblance of law and order. If you see any class of people lodged in jail, there's a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems. Now we are seeing crowded jails because of NDPS Act, because of this drug addictions. At the same time, we are not able to manage jails. A lot of information, a lot of illegal or trades are being run from the jail. So at the same time, it is very important that those fellows are kept away. I think sometimes in a particular case, we would like to keep them where they are.
For example.
Yes. I'd like, we've, as I said, a lot of questions coming in. I've got one very interesting one, which is again, in some sense related to the administration. And I'd like to direct it to you again, Mr. Rajinder Singh. They say, this is Neeraj Sharma. He says, extremists are now playing at rural areas, targeting people's emotions to divide communities to go for long-term impact on a bigger stage. How do you see the role at micro level, like panchayats, blocks, to educate and these misguided people? Does the government have any thrust, any program to target with the kind of narrowness that in fact the radicalizers are targeting? I mean, we've seen how narrowly the radicalizers target people. Does the government have an equally effective targeting response?
both aspects. Number one, whether there is such thing happening in the villages, I am not really aware. I am not able to verify it, that whether it is being done in an organized manner. There can be sporadic incidents. If it comes to our notice, I think police is quite responsive. Police does take prompt action in this regard. At the same time, there's hardly any program with any panchayat or any government to educate people or to counter such things. In fact, there was no necessity for the time being. That's why, of course, panchayats are having a lot of big role to sort of do that. They should streamline people. They should streamline the thinking of the people. They should educate them. They should guide them. Because a lot of other mischiefs are taking place in the society. The role of elders in the society is very important, so that they can guide them, so that they can be sort of saved from indulgence in various unlawful activities.
Thank you. I'll give you just about 30 seconds, General Panag. Would you like to just bring us to a close of this program? Your last observations.
Yeah, what I would like to say, Ajay, is that all the ingredients which are required, purely from the military point of view, for a terrorism to make a resurgence and for this thing, are present in Punjab today. Now, I'll just briefly list them out. Border state, ISI, a religious community that revels in its past, and glorification of its past, and also great importance to sacrifice, and a persecution complex right from its birth. And it sees it in a different context, but it's there. Agriculture mainstay, landholdings diminishing, shrinking income, loss of relative affluence.
Thank you.
Relative affluence, lack of unemployment, lacking quality education in Punjab, whereas the youth doesn't find any job, so he wants to go abroad, spends lots of money, and then gets radicalized there. High in alcohol and drug dependency among the youth. This is a societal problem. They must need to take charge. As I mentioned, every family has one NRI. This is somehow we have to address this problem. And the SGPC, which is the face of the Sikhs. I mean, after all, it's an act of it's a part of our constitution. It's an act the SGPC Act. It is not playing its designed role. No, the education institutions and all the other welfare things that came up are decaying. They are not playing their role.
I think these are all issues we will be taking up, I think, one by one in our future programs. I think you've given us an extremely important listing of the most important.
And last thing is the state has got a debt of 2.82 crores. We are talking of administration. So what administration will it carry out when it has to borrow money to pay the wages of its employees?
Right. I'd like to thank you all the participants, the many questions that we have not been able to answer, but I am very sure we will be taking note of these, and we will certainly try to address them in our future programs. Thank you very much, General Panag, Mr. Rajinder Singh, Professor Rajivlochan. This was an interesting, I think everyone would have found it very rewarding to have listened to you. Thank you, and hope to have you again on this platform.